everybody, welcome back to my channel. So I recently put up a video on my channel talking about how casting really works, and I went through a lot of the technicalities that casters have to consider and build on and grow, and what, casting is predominantly made up of. And it actually got a really good reception. I'm really glad a lot of people found it interesting. I had fellow casters from the industry also praise it, which was really nice. I wanted to kind of go off the back of that and discuss a topic today which I think is a lot more relevant to us here in Siege. It's something that affects the way that people talk about the talent in this game, but no one ever really talks about why that is. And I was thinking about it a lot, particularly today, but over the last couple of days, and I thought it would be something that's quite interesting to talk about. And that is, why does Siege have different expectations for talent than what we see in other games? If you see me looking down, once again, I've done my classic and written notes, not quite as extensive as the other ones. As talent, receiving criticism about certain things, yes, it can come down to the person not necessarily understanding the role of talent, but I think for those of us in Siege, it can also be particularly frustrating because a lot of that misunderstanding comes from the fact that many people in Siege simply don't have a good concept of how talent is done in other games and other esports. And it can be really frustrating seeing us doing stuff that is normal in other games and be criticized for it as if it's kind of wacky and out there. I mean, from a personal perspective, a really obvious example is the idea of bringing talent in from other games. I was one of those talent who got brought in from other games, and it got seriously criticized here in Siege and has done for a number of people. Same thing happened for Veli. It's perfectly normal. Talent move games all the time. But I wanted to kind of talk about it in a somewhat chronological order. So overall, there is a different community expectation from the Siege community about what they get and what they want as a result out of their talent than what we see in other esports. And I think it's very important to go back to kind of the beginning of Siege esports to have a look at where it kind of came from. And Siege's esports inception was really defined by enthusiasts of the game. Why this is important and why this is notable and why this even happened is because when Siege came out as a game, it was buggy as hell. So it wasn't something that was immediately broadcast to the masses as, yeah, come play our game, like it's great. So the people who did get into Siege and did get into the competitive scene were very, protective over it. This is our thing, and they're enthusiasts. They're people who are there because the depth of the game and the analysis and all the nitty-gritty, all of that stuff is really important to them, despite those issues that may push away kind of more casual people or the masses, the general population of gamers. Now, what you're oftentimes going to expect from enthusiasts is they're not necessarily there for entertainment. Predominantly, they're going to be there for that analysis, for the really dry kind of, nitty-gritty stuff. Which just isn't kind of how esports works. I mean, think back to when Pro League started. Now, I don't know how many of you are going to remember this or even know this, but when Pro League first got picked up by ESL and became a thing, the talent jobs were advertised on their website. It was basically a page on their website that said, if you're interested in casting this game for Pro League, please reach out to us. I can't even think of another game where I've seen that happen, at least not in the last, half a decade. It simply doesn't work that way. And so alone, that kind of shows like Siege was, it was almost grassroots, right? It was coming from the ground up. And as a direct result, that meant that there was no veteran talent in the game. We didn't have big names coming in from other games to, lend their talents. We didn't have already experienced casters who were coming in to take the mantle and set a precedent based on what was the standard in other games. In a lot of cases, it was just people who were starting from the ground up and talking about the game. In fact, the only two talent that I can think of, so I could be wrong, that could be seen in part of that OG talent wave of Rainbow Six talent, who worked in other games, would be Milosh and Intero. And even then, those two weren't there from the start. but we do associate them with that long time thing. Milosh had obviously been in Battlefield for a long time. I'm pretty sure Milosh also has experience casting CS. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he does. Intero had come for, I think he'd started in Overwatch. I know he had experience casting Call of Duty as well, way back when, but that's the closest that was kind of there. Other than that, everybody came up through Siege, and both of them really made their names in Siege. So even though they had some experience from other games, it wasn't anything super high tier. That came from Siege for both of them. So it kind of manifested itself as a scene and as a talent pool and things like that. There was no real strong influence from outside of that because that's not how it had grown. And the same goes for the community. The same also goes for the players. Siege is not a game where you typically see lateral transference of players from one game to another, i.e. a lot of pro Siege players didn't come from another game, and a lot of pro Siege players have not retired to another game. You can see a lot of that in games like, I suppose there's a big sort of complicated Venn diagram that would encompass TF2, Quake, Overwatch, Valorant, and CSGO, where there's a lot of overlap and you've seen players jump between those games. And even then, that's not exhaustive. Siege isn't really like that. It's existed in its own bubble, it kind of grew itself, it came from the ground up, and has always sort of existed independently of other esports because people haven't been brought in to build the scene from other esports. The other thing is, and this might sound really quite small and random, but the branding for the Pro League was almost quite intimidating, right? When you look at esports like, I don't know, even like League of Legends or Overwatch or Valorant or, what else? Dota, arguably, it's a lot of kind of energy, bright, colors, things like that. And yes, Siege is not, unless you're playing Rainbow as Magic, Siege is not that game. But the broadcast still should be, to an extent. It's important to be getting energy in. But the kind of idea that the Siege Pro League was going for, it was very dark, it was very serious, and it didn't incite a lot of that kind of humorous or solely entertaining side of things. That's not the way that it was. It was simply, here are our people who speak over the game, they're talking about the game, here are our people who play the game, and here's our serious music to just add to that. What this kind of led to, I think, is the fact that you ended up with talent personalities really underutilized. It comes up every now and then that Siege is at a dearth of personalities. I actually don't necessarily think that's true. I think Siege as a scene never really learned how to use them. And that comes from all angles. That's players, that's content, that's talent, that's I guess production to an extent, and behind the scenes things. And because I wasn't around in the scene, like actually part of it at that time, I wasn't privy to where those decisions were or were not made, so I'm not going to speculate too much. But the point stands is that talent personalities have always been underutilized. There hasn't ever been content in the same way that there has been in other games. For example, in other games you would have even just shoulder content that involved talent interacting with each other. There isn't really much of that in Siege. There never has been. Beyond what you see on the broadcast and things like that, there isn't a ton of just content that is played that shows off friendships and camaraderie. Even when you think back of the era of YouTube and those big YouTube friendship groups and stuff that would get popular, the reason those people got famous is because people enjoy watching fun relationships between people on camera, and that was never anything that was super encouraged in Siege. Every now and then there would be some in Siege. So for example, I think you can remember the Daddy's Back little skit thing that was done about Emzo, and everyone loves that. But the thing is, the reason it's so memorable is because it was a rarity. It wasn't something that happened a lot. It wasn't something that was really lent into, but it was fun. I think a really important thing where this is quite evident is when we look at Siege desks historically. Now, I came from Overwatch as my first game. I've worked in other games since then, and I've probably worked in arguably the most games of anyone who works in Siege. At least I'm up there somewhere. I haven't counted. But Overwatch, I remember the Overwatch 2018 World Cup desk was at the time, I remember social media literally talking, and this was beyond just the Overwatch scene, talking about how this was arguably the best desk that we had ever had at any esports event ever, because how entertaining it was so good. There was good analysis, there was camaraderie, there was stupidness, there was humor. It was very natural that these people on the desk were friends, and Golden Boy, as the ringleader and the desk host, was just phenomenally good at managing that. That's not something we've ever had in Siege. You go back and you watch various Siege events, you know, from let's say 2018, 2019, you don't have that. You'll have a few people on the desk and they'll be discussing what's going on in the game, but it's quite, I don't want to say low energy, because it's not like these people sound like they're bored, but it's all at that one level. It's like, oh, here's some analysis about it. I don't feel like they're all like buddies who are hanging out and enjoying the game. And it's something that has been very much noted by many people over the years, that the most fun broadcasts to watch are the ones where you feel like you're just hanging out with your friends and enjoying yourself. And if the talent on screen aren't doing that, it's very hard to feel that as a viewer. Now, none of that is the fault of those people who are on the desk. You know, for a lot of it, it'd be Milos who is hosting. We'd oftentimes see personalities like Zeronic or Dev Marta or anything like that. Now, I'm going to tell you this straight up. I worked with all three of those people when I was on EUL. And Zeronic is one of the funniest people I've ever worked with. Behind the scenes and before we were live, we would be crying with laughter about random crap. Milos has one of the driest sense of humor. He's a very sly sense of humor and makes really funny quips. And Dev is an incredibly energetic and upbeat guy. None of that ever got facilitated and brought out on those desks, you know, and I never would have known that that is what those people were like in reality just by being a spectator. And so it's not that they are boring people and they don't know what to do or anything like that. It's that there was never any development on how to draw out those personalities on the desk. Now, where I'm going with this is that this is the expectation that's come to be in this scene. Siege was very synonymous with the heavy analysis, the kind of seriousness. People were very attached to the talent who were, on the broadcast, and of course they should be. That's what happens when you're used to seeing faces around all the time. But because a lot of the Siege scene was quite insular and has never truly had big branches to other esports scene, many of the people who watch Siege don't watch other esports. So there's no real point of reference outside of Siege for how those things usually are. So people became used to this kind of standard and this expectation that doesn't really involve much humor or entertainment factor and is a lot more dry. It's a lot more, straight up, deadpan, analytical, whatever. And the thing is, that is just not conducive to running a top-tier broadcast and bringing in new viewers. The thing with this is Siege talk a lot about how much they want to be a tier 1 broadcast. After SI 2020, which was, I think, the biggest event that we've ever had, we were rated as a tier 1 esport and people lost their freaking minds over it because it was fucking exciting, and I don't blame them. I felt the same way as well. Personally, I think that the way to judge a tier 1 esport is not as cut and dry as the criteria that we use for that, but it doesn't really matter in this case. The point is we really want to be taken seriously as a tier 1 broadcast. We really want to be a tier 1 esport. We want people to look at us in the same way that they look at CSGO and they look at League of Legends and they look at Dota and things like that. But we're holding people to standards that are not aligned with tier 1 broadcast. If you want Siege to be a tier 1 esport and to have everything that all these others do, you cannot hold talent to the standards that were developed as a result of this being a grassroots esport community that didn't really have influence from anything outside of that. And that includes, you can't just say, all I want is the casters to just talk about, the setup that's happening on screen. Do you know how boring that would sound if everything that is coming out of casters' mouth is literally just describing what's on screen and why? And you can go and watch my video on casting to learn a little bit more about how casters choose what to talk about and where the value comes in. Now, talking about something like that can provide analytical value, I agree. But it's the job of the caster to figure out if analytical value is the most valuable thing that they can derive from the situation at hand. I could talk about why this is happening, but I could get more value in the cast from talking about something else. And that's a lot of what it comes down to, right? I don't want to go on a tangent about that stuff because I already made a video about it. But the point that I'm making here is that Siege has kind of grown up with this certain way of doing things that is quite insular and it's quite independent. And it's really nice that we have our own personality as a scene. I like it. I think it's cool. And we, you know, are very... we like our family here in Siege. We like the people that we have. We're very proud of what we have and what we've developed as a scene. But I think we are missing so much and have missed so much that other esports get to cherish and just enjoy. Mostly because in a lot of cases, we're just simply ignorant to what we're missing out on. And what it means is that when talent have tried to branch into those kinds of things, they have been met with a lot of criticism. And much of that just comes down to people not liking change, right? And also a lot of those enthusiasts not necessarily wanting to share that space. They don't want to share that airtime. It's a bit gatekeepy, to put it perfectly bluntly. And it's kind of hard to see, you know, people like, you know, Kix and Intero have had some criticism recently for being too, I don't know, off topic and joking around too much. And I think it was Intero who put something on Reddit saying, we used to get criticism for being too serious, or we realized we were being too serious, and this has been something that we've actively been trying to do. And it's them trying to branch out and actually take some influence from other successful esports and big casters that is being shut down because people are afraid of change. And the thing is if you're afraid of change and you won't allow change to happen in what's going on with the talent, how they present themselves, then we are never going to make it to being a tier 1 esport consistently, because people won't want to come and watch. The thing is, Siege is a very difficult game and it needs people to make it accessible. And if you're making the talent and the broadcast inaccessible, immediately, it's gonna not work out. You know, this kind of fear of change was also very evident when a lot of new casters were brought in at the start of the new format last year. Obviously, I was a part of that. And, you know, I get it, like, it happens. But it is, to people who have experience in other esports or have worked in other esports, who have friends in other esports or watch other esports, it's very clear when certain criticisms come from the fact that people don't really understand how things in the industry as a whole work and what has specifically helped make other esports really popular. The reason why the LEC is arguably one of the best broadcasts in the entire esports world is because of how fucking good their content is. And the way they utilize their talent is insane. They always have them interacting in various different content pieces, and the way that they, you know, operate together. And it is so much fun to watch, and it's great, and it makes you attached to that, the talent lineup, and it makes you enjoy watching what they get up to. And that is a real kind of key into how to have a successful esports broadcasting and how to have a good relationship with the talent team as well as a viewer. I think this is something that in Siege has improved over the last couple of years as we've become a much bigger esport and our events have become way more spectacular, and more people have been intrigued by what's going on here. But it is important that the things that happen on the day-to-day and the regular season and stuff like that are also understood and pushed towards that same standard that we see in other esports that have just made them so good. You know, it's funny, having come from Overwatch, a lot of people have criticisms to say about the game or how they don't like the esport, which is totally valid. That's fine. You're welcome to your opinion. But I think a lot of people also don't necessarily acknowledge how good the broadcasts themselves were and the way that the talent interact and the talent work with each other and the things that the talent bring. And yeah, you can get great analytical content and you can get great casting and you can get all of this stuff, but it cannot exist on its own because it's really boring if that happens. And it has to be injected with an enjoyment and a lust for life that shouldn't be shot down by a community when talent tried to do that. So anyway, this was mostly just like a discussion piece, I suppose. I'm really interested to know what people's opinions on this are, because I think that the inception of Siege as an esport is a fascinating topic because of how much it differs from certain other esports. You know, you compare it to how certain other esports scenes have come about, and especially esports scenes where veteran casters have entered into it early and things like that, and you've seen a lot of transfer of talent, which even still now happens in things like League of Legends, right? You get casters from other games going into League of Legends even now. So it's a really interesting one, and for me as a talent in Siege, like, it excites me, the idea of talent development as things go on, and, you know, leaning into things like content and being able to have that kind of fun side of things injected more into the broadcasts, because it makes broadcasts more fun to watch. And I'm really stoked about that. So yes, let me know what you think. I am genuinely really interested, because this isn't an angle that I see approached a lot when this kind of topic comes up. But yeah. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'm sure we'll have something interesting to talk about again soon. But for now, I will catch you later. Goodbye.